Welcome, everyone, and welcome to week one. Before we talk about European ships, maps, or ocean voyages, I want to start by shattering a major historical myth. For a long time, old history books made it sound like North America before 1492 was just a vast, untamed wilderness waiting around for someone to discover it. That couldn't be further from the truth. Long before Christopher Columbus ever set sail, North America was a bustling, diverse continent, home to millions of people speaking hundreds of distinct languages, with complex political alliances, deep religious traditions, and wildly impressive architecture. To understand just how diverse this continent was, let's look at two completely different indigenous societies. Imagine standing in Chaco Canyon in modern day New Mexico around the year 1100. You wouldn't see temporary tents or scattered shelters. You would be staring at a massive, multi story stone and adobe structures built directly into the cliff faces, featuring hundreds of interconnected rooms. These were the ancestral Puebloans living in an arid desert. They became absolute masters of environmental engineering, constructing complex canal and irrigation systems to divert water across miles of dry land to cultivate maize, beans, and squash. Agriculture was the heartbeat of their society, shaping their religion, their architecture, and their permanent communities. Now, let's travel thousands of miles northwest to the lush coastal forest of Washington State and Alaska, home to groups like the Chinook and the Tlingit. Up here, you won't find cornfields or stone pueblos. Instead, you'll see massive cedar longhouses overlooking the ocean, framed by towering, intricately carved totem poles. Why no farming? Well, because the Pacific Ocean and local rivers were so ridiculously abundant with salmon, whales, and shellfish that they didn't need agriculture to sustain large, permanent communities. Ocean fishing provided so much wealth and stability that these societies developed complex social hierarchies and rich artistic traditions centered around the natural world. Geography dictated everything. If you remember one thing about pre contact North America, let it be this: environment shaped culture long before Europeans ever arrived. So, what changed? Why did Europeans suddenly show up on the horizon in the late 15th century? To answer that, we have to jump across the ocean to Europe in the mid 1400s. For centuries, wealthy European elites had been obsessed with luxury goods from Asia, things like spices, silk, porcelain, and pepper. But there was a major problem. To get those goods, merchants, European merchants had to rely on long, dangerous overland trade routes known as the Silk Road. Then, in 1453, a massive geopolitical event occurred. The Ottoman Empire captured the city of Constantinople. Overnight, the Ottomans took control of those trade routes, imposing heavy taxes and strictly regulating trade between East and West. European monarchs were desperate. If they wanted access to Asian riches without paying exorbitant prices to the middlemen, they needed to find a direct, all water sea route to Asia. Portugal took the lead by trying to sail south, hugging the coast of Africa to round the continent into the Indian Ocean. Spain, newly unified under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, was desperate not to fall behind the Portuguese rivals. Enter an ambitious Genoesian sea captain named Christopher Columbus. Columbus proposed a bold, high risk gamble. Instead of sailing around Africa, why not directly west across the open Atlantic Ocean? Columbus vastly underestimated the size of the Earth, truly believing he could sail west and bump directly into Japan or China. Spain decided to fund the expedition, driven by a mixture of intense economic competition and religious zeal following the end of the Reconquista. On October the 12th, 1492, after weeks of sea, Columbus's ships spotted land in the Bahamas. He believed that he had reached the East Indies, but in reality, he had stumbled into an entire hemisphere previously unknown to Europeans. This moment marks the beginning of the Columbian Exchange, the massive, permanent transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and humans between the eastern and western hemispheres. But right away in Columbus's journal, we see European motives laid bare. On his very first day ashore, he wrote about three distinct things: finding gold, converting the native people to Catholicism, and assessing how easily they could be controlled. In his journal, he literally writes this: they should be good servants. With 50 men, they can all be subjugated and made to do what is required of them. As Spanish explorers and conquistadors pushed further into the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America, the Spanish crown established a formal system to govern these new territories and extract wealth: the encomienda system. Under the system, the King of Spain granted conquistadors legal authority over specific tracts of land and all the indigenous people living on them. In theory, the Spaniard was supposed to protect the native people and instruct them in Catholic faith. In reality, it was a brutal system of forced labor where indigenous populations were forced to mine for silver and gold or work on massive agricultural plantations under terrible conditions. Combined with European diseases like smallpox, to which native populations had no natural immunity, and millions of indigenous people perished within a few decades. It's also important to realize how the Spanish model of colonization differed from England, who would later on in Jamestown or New England. Spain governed its colonies through strict, direct royal control using viceroys appointed by the king, focusing heavily on religious conversion and extracting mineral wealth using forced native labor. England, on the other hand, wouldn't show up until over a century later, using private joint stock companies that brought over entire family units to establish a permanent agricultural settlements, often pushing native populations off the land entirely rather than integrating them into the colonial society. Now, was everyone in Spain okay with the cruelty of the Encomienda system? Surprisingly, no. One of the most powerful critics was a man named Bartolome de las Casas. Las Casas actually started out as a Spanish conquistador and landholder who owned an encomienda in Cuba. But after witnessing the horrific mistreatment and demographic collapse of the native people, he experienced a moral transformation. He gave up his land, freed his workers, became a Dominican friar, and dedicated the rest of his life, long life, to exposing the atrocities committed in the Americas. In 1542, he published a famous account where he wrote the Spanish colonizers entered native villages like cruel tigers, wolves, and lions, starved for many days. Now, destroying everything in their path, Las Casas took his argument directly to the King of Spain, sparking famous debates in Europe over human rights, natural law, and morality of imperial conquest. So, as we wrap up this lecture for week one, bring all of these threads together, and now let's think about the rich diversity of Native American societies before 1492. The economic pressures that pushed Europe across the ocean, the harsh realities of the encomienda system, and the voices that protested against it. This brings us directly into your main assignment for the week. In critical thinking assignment number 1, you're going to jump into Columbus's actual 1492 entries and answer this core question. Was the primary driver of early European exploration economic ambition, religious mission, or national rivalry? Make sure to take a clear stance. Back it up with two very specific pieces of evidence from the reading. And don't forget to complete your reading check and your 5-question lecture quiz before Sunday night at 11:59. You're all off to a great start. Now go have a good week.